Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and very much appreciate your involvement and participation. Let me just get right to the heart of what Senator Tester and I are working on. He has a constitutional amendment. I have a constitutional amendment. We're working together on these. We think this is a very good joint approach, and we very much believe that working together on these two amendments, we can resolve a lot of the campaign finance issues that have flowed from Buckley versus Valeo in 1976. As many of you know, Buckley versus Valeo was the opinion that said money equals speech, which is, in my opinion, completely wrong. It doesn't fit with the reality of things, and I think it shows how out of touch the Supreme Court is with the politics of the day. Really, the only way to change these Supreme Court opinions is to focus on the issue of changing the court, or getting them to change their opinion, which I think is pretty unlikely right now, or with a constitutional amendment, and that's why we're here today. What the constitutional amendment that I'm focusing on, it limits campaign finance expenditures. It grants Congress and the states the express authority to regulate and limit the raising and spending of money for political campaigns, includes the authority to regulate and limit independent expenditures like those from super PACs and corporations. It would not dictate any specific policies or regulations, but instead would allow Congress and the states to pass campaign finance reform legislation that withstands constitutional challenges, and expressly provides that any regulation authorized under the amendment cannot limit the freedom of the press. I hope you all realize, not limit the freedom of the press, okay? It's been a bipartisan amendment over the years. Senator Bennett and I put this in 2011. He's a lead with me also on it. The bipartisanship has been shared all the way back to the 1980s. Ted Stevens, Arlen Specter, John Danforth, Thad Cochran, and John McCain have all either been on the amendment or voted for the amendment. So with that, I'm going to ask my Western colleague, the great senator from the state of Montana, to tell us about his amendment, and then we're happy to answer any questions. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I very much appreciate your leadership on this issue. There's a lot of important issues we're dealing with: immigration, education, the national debt, and what these constitutional amendments deal with, and that's dark money. The impacts on our democracy is been huge. Compromise has become something that is a thing of the past. Information that's been doled out during these election processes have been absolutely overwhelming. For instance, in 2006 when I ran, there was $26 million spent on that race. In 2012, there was $47 million, much of it dark money. And that, by the way, is for 495,000 votes. That's almost $100 a vote was spent in this last election because of the dark money, because of the corporations who we don't know who they were, putting in a bunch of dough into these election cycles trying to influence them. It's not good for the Republicans, it's not good for the Democrats, but most importantly, it's not good for our democracy. So I put forth this constitutional amendment that basically says what we all know, and that is corporations are not people. Back in 1912, because of the Copper Kings, we saw Montana's government all but bought and paid for, and the people of Montana stood up back in 1912 and said enough is enough. In this last election cycle, the people of Montana once again said enough is enough, and they passed by a large margin a initiative that said we want our elected officials in Washington, D.C. to put forth a constitutional amendment that tells that corporations are not people, and that's exactly what I am doing today. What does that do? I think it ends the dark money, ends the influence, unbelievable influence out there of the dark money in these elections. I'll just say this, and this is something that you all know. Every decision that we make that's the least bit controversial impacts somebody in a negative way. And we can talk about those impacts if we know who's putting up the money. But if we don't know who's putting up the money, we can't fight back. And And I can tell you, I saw it firsthand last election cycle. And I think that thanks to folks, leadership of folks like Tom Udall, and thanks to constitutional initiatives like this one, I think we can put the elections back in the hands of people and their ideas, not corporations and their money. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Please.
Well, how do you get in a Congress where the Democrats don't have 2/3 and Republicans control the House? How do you actually get it through Congress to even get to the states?
Well, just let me say this. The Montana Republican Party had a convention here last week in Montana, and there was a good, large group of Montana Republican legislators that stood up and said, we want to end dark money, we want to end it today. Washington, D.C. needs to take their lead. This should not be a partisan issue. This should be a bipartisan issue because it's not good for the democracy. And I think that the more we talk about it, the more we put this issue out front, the more folks are going to start realizing that this isn't good for Democrats, it's not good for Republicans, it's not good for our democracy. We all need to work together to fix it.
You know, building on what John said, if you look across the country, the campaign finance reform that's been done at the state level and at the local level has been very, very bipartisan, and it's growing up and out of the grassroots, and it's something that is taking hold. It hasn't hit here yet, but I think the fact that my amendment in the past had these 5 Republicans on it, either voting for it and supporting it, shows that we've got support there, and the both sides ought to be very, very concerned about where we're headed on this. If you look at an election, Senator Tester has been through it more recently than I have, an election where this money comes in and you don't know where the money's from, completely corrupts democracy and the whole connection between elected candidates and the democracy itself. So this is something that we've got to get a hold of. I'm reminded my grandfather ran for Supreme Court in Arizona in 1948, the year I was born, and he campaigned on $928. I mean, you can go back. John could pick out people in Montana. Money was not flooding the system the way it is today. And it's not having a good impact, and we have to get control of it, and that's what these 2 amendments do.
What's your assessment of the prospects for any type of campaign finance legislation getting to the floor of the Senate anytime soon, before the next election, say? Is that a possibility?
Well, I think we're going to see a Disclose Act vote this cycle, would be my guess. That seems to be the one that has the most chance, because in the past Republicans have been so very, very supportive. They have said over and over again, we want everything out there, we want it on the internet, and we want it to be instantaneous.
Yeah, and I would agree with Tom. I think that the disclosure bill is probably going to be the first one and most likely to vote on. And why? Because transparency is good in government, and elections are a part of government. And so, but I think just as important is the fact that Tom is pushing for his legislation, I'm pushing for my legislation, trying to get critical mass, and it may help not only get these across the line, but the Disclose Act across the finish line, so we can get it put into place.
And it's the dynamic of the 3.
Just building on Jonathan's question, how many co-sponsors are on each of your bill? And I know you talked about some Republicans who had supported yours in the past. Are they some of them that are current members, like Senator McCain, are they supportive this time around as well?
Well, we're at the very early stages. I don't think this has only been in circulation a couple of days. Is that correct? Yeah. So, I expect it to grow pretty rapidly as we move along here. There are discussions right now with all of the 5 members who I mentioned, 2 of whom I think are still here. We're having discussions, and we hope they join us. And
yeah, and basically the same thing. The referendum that people in Montana voted on was last November. We went to work. This is real fresh, and we're hoping to get lots of folks from both sides on board. But it's going to take some work. It's going to take some explaining, but that's okay. Education is part of this process too.
Are you working with Senator Baucus on this?
Max actually has a constitutional amendment himself, which is very, very good, and so I think the more prong approach we can get, hopefully in the end we'll get something across that will do some good. This is this whole thing with the elections, the way they're run right now, does not result in a better form electorate, and I think it turns people off to public service, limits compromise. I mean, it's just got a lot of bad to it, so hopefully we can get folks to realize that and move forward.
Do you think it helps you when you talk to your colleagues and make your case for this amendment to be able to share your personal experience because you had such a high spending, re-election campaign?
Absolutely, and it's very, very difficult to let many of the folks I served with understand what we went through. But myself, as well as my opponent, went through a lot of unnecessary advertising. I think the statistic I heard, and I haven't been able to confirm it, was that in Montana in the month of October, there were 50% more TV ads run in the month of October than any other Senate race ever. So, I mean, it shows you the kind of money that came in, and a lot of this money we didn't know where it came from, didn't know who was doing it, and some of it was for me and some of it was against me, but it all needs to be either transparent or get the elections back in people's hands. I think that's what's critically important.
Let their voices be heard. Let their voices be heard.
Senator Murkowski and Senator Wyden teamed up for their version of the Disclose Act. Is that one of the things on the table too? Are you working with them as well on this?
Absolutely. I think transparency is a big part of my brand, and we work with anybody and everybody, including Wyden and Murkowski about making government more transparent.
Yeah, there are a lot of what I would call bipartisan efforts that are sprouting out there. I mean, I know that Senator McCain joined Senator Whitehouse on an effort to take up the Montana Supreme Court case to try to make sure that the Supreme Court would take a look at that. And so I think we're at the point where we need to show folks that we are headed in the right direction with these two amendments, that these are the ones to coalesce behind, and that this is going to do the job and turn the elections back over to the American people. Okay.
All right.
Thank you
Thank you
very
all very
much.
much.
Really
Yep.
appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks you.